Okay, everyone, welcome and thank you so much for joining us for our event honoring Women's Equality Day, the road to equality. And we have a great program for you today. So we're going to start it off by bringing up our president, Barbara Bozeman, to give our opening address and give you guys some more information about the organization. Followed up by just a little background on a Women's Equality Day and our advocacy platform at NFBPWC. Kathy Talbin will be taking over as the moderator of this event, and then she'll introduce our fantastic host of panelists that we have. First up will be Tina Cassidy, who will be talking about the passage of the 19th Amendment and the history going into that. Followed up by Wendy Murphy, who will discuss the 28th Amendment, or the Equal Rights Amendment, from when it was introduced through the 1990s. And then Kamala Lopez will be wrapping us up through the fight today as it continues. We will end everything by an open question and answer. So please hold your questions until the end. And if you have questions in the meantime, feel free to pop those in the chat. We will be having all the question and answer time at the end of the session. And then we have some exciting call to actions for you at the end of this event. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Barbara Bozeman.
Well, hello, everyone. I would like to say good morning, but for some it is morning, some it is afternoon, and for some of our guests who are joining us, it is going to be evening. But as the National Federation of Business and Professional Women's Clubs president, I would like to welcome you to this fabulous program that we are having today. I'd like to thank our panelists for joining us as well. First, I would like to talk a little bit about the history of NFBPWC, what the Business and Professional Women's Organization is all about. The National Federation of Business and Professional Women's Clubs was established in 1919, making it one of the oldest organizations for working women in the United States. The organization was founded by Dr. Lena Madison Phillips, who was a pioneering advocate for women's rights. She recognized the need for unify business and professional women across the country to work together towards equality in the workplace, promoting the interests of working women and encouraging women to participate in all aspects of civic life. From the very beginning, NFBPWC has been involved in advocating for the rights of women, particularly in labor and employment. The organization has played a significant role in pushing forward the passage of the Equal Rights Amendment and involved in a number of wide issues, including equal pay, women's health, and education. We have also been instrumental in the establishment of Women's Equality Day, which is celebrated annually on the 26th of August to commemorate the certification of the 19th Amendment, which granted women the right to vote. Now, in 1930, Dr. Lena Madison Phillips helped develop the larger international BPW network. Today, NFBPWC and BPW work closely with BPW International to advance the status of women globally, with members engaging in initiatives that support the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Now, most recently, we're involved, again, as I've said, in economic empowerment, health and wellness, and leadership development for women. A program that is near and dear to our advocacy chair's heart, as well as every member of NFBPWC, was a recent development regarding the Period Poverty Project and promoting gender equality in all aspects of life. We organize various events, as the one you're here for today, conferences and workshops that are aimed on professional development, networking, and advocacy, and providing women a platform to develop and learn and grow and take their rightful place in every part of our community. Over that more than 100-year history, NFBPWC has made significant contributions to the advancement of women in the workplace. The organization has led for advocacy just as we are today. This is another step on the road for us. And we hope that you will find, as our program information outlines, that you will be agitated into action by what you hear today. On behalf of NFBPWC, I welcome you to this program. Now, on the slide before you, you see a little bit of information. You see the yellow rose. And I want to talk to you a little bit about the history of why we wear yellow for, excuse me, why we wear yellow for Women's Equality Day. And it started in 1920 in Tennessee. It was called the War of the Roses. Tennessee was the state that was the last to ratify the 19th Amendment. And during the battles of the week, as you all know, before we go for a vote, there are always conversations and conferences and coalitions. And how you could tell who was on what side of the issue came down to roses. If you were against the 19th Amendment being ratified, then you wore a red rose. And if you were for it, you wore a yellow rose. And it came down to the very last day, they were deadlocked, or they believed that they were deadlocked. And Feb Byrne, her son, was a legislator. And in what is now a very, very famous hand-penned note that she wrote to her son, she asked him to be a good boy and remember the women. And that's what he did. At the very last moment, he changed his vote. And that is what allowed the 19th Amendment to be ratified. His vote. It came down to one vote. And so the yellow roses were significant in that War of the Roses. And that is the first step on that path of why we wear yellow for Women's Equality Day. Now, in the next line, August 26th of 1930, and it is very interesting that those dates aligned so well. But Lena Madison Phillips, she was an American lawyer, and I have mentioned her already. She was a key advocate for women's rights, and she founded BPW International in 1930. She was committed to advancing the role of women in business and professional fields, and the color yellow, which has become associated with women's suffrage movement, and again with the War of the Roses, continued to symbolize the empowerment and the pursuit of equality that BPW embodied. In 2016, the international president for BPW, Yasmin Darwich, Dr. Yasmin Darwich, initiated what is called the Wear Yellow campaign. So this campaign was back the historical significance of the color yellow in the women in the suffrage movement, and highlighted the continuous global struggle for women's rights and empowerment. And the campaign became a visual statement of solidarity and a reminder of the progress that is still needed to achieve gender equality. So that is why wearing yellow for Women's Equality Day has become and continues to be a powerful tribute to the struggle for women's rights. From the War of the Roses, the ratification of the 19th Amendment, the founding of BPW. It is a vibrant symbol of the ongoing fight, and it is a call to action. And that is how we come to why we wear yellow for Women's Equality Day. Thank you for listening to my very long introduction, but I would like to turn it now over to our Vice President of Advocacy, Emily Van Vleck. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about Emily before she speaks. But Emily has been a part of BPW for a very long time. She started as a young BPW intern. She became a young BPW officer, representing us very well and raising awareness on so many aspects that we were not aware of prior to her joining us. She continues today as our Vice President of Advocacy. I would like to turn it over now to Emily Van Vleck.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our event, The Road to Equality, in honor of Women's Equality Day. And thank you, President Boozman, for your introduction, for opening our event and sharing the history of wearing yellow and the yellow rose. A bit about Women's Equality Day for those who are unaware, and why we're hosting this event in commemoration of this day. So it was declared in 1971 through a congressional declaration that August 26th would be known as Women's Equality Day. And it was selected to commemorate the 1920 certification of the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, granting women the right to vote. So the day not only commemorates the passage of the 19th Amendment, but also calls attention to the struggles and the fight, the efforts that are still being made to achieve gender equality. So, as Barbara mentioned, I am Emily Van Vleck, the Vice President of Advocacy for the 2024-2026 term. The National Federation of Business and Professional Women's Club has a robust advocacy platform, as you can see on the screen. We are centered around three main topics related to women's equality and gender equity: economic equity and justice, human rights, and health equity and justice. First and foremost, on our advocacy platform, we recognize that the Equal Rights Amendment shall stand above all other items until women's equal rights have been secured in the United States Constitution. NFBPWC engages in many advocacy initiatives, including legislative outreach and education and awareness campaigns. Our recent initiatives are focused on the Equal Rights Amendment, period poverty, and rights for women on the move. For more information on our advocacy initiatives, you can visit nfbpwc.org/advocacy. Now, without further ado, I am going to introduce our moderator and the mastermind behind this fantastic event, Ms. Kathy Talbin. So Kathy Talbin is the Chief Outcome Strategist for iSolvIt, an organizational effectiveness firm that works with corporations, nonprofits, and educational institutions to improve their outcomes where everyone matters. She's been a member of the National Federation of Business and Professional Women's Club for almost 40 years. In 2012, Kathy was the founding president of our virtual affiliate that will be celebrating its 12th anniversary. She focuses her volunteer efforts on legislation and professional development. And Kathy, I will pass it over to you.
Thank you, Emily. I appreciate that. If you could move forward on this slide, I'd appreciate it. And I guess you'll learn more about Alice Paul with our first speaker, but this is also to realize that Alice Paul was responsible for the 19th as well as the 28th Amendment. And she was a very smart woman, she was a suffragist and feminist, and again, a main leader for the 19th Amendment. If you can go again, move again. Thank you. So what's important is we've talked about the 19th and 28th Amendment, and I just wanted to highlight, I'm starting to call these the bookends of equality because, you know, from the inception of our country with our Constitution, women were not intended to be in the Constitution. And it's actually the 19th Amendment that actually sex was even mentioned. And so when you look at the 19th Amendment, which some say began, the fight started in 1948 when Seneca Falls had its Convention of Sentiments, and it passed in 1920. And then we've got the 28th Amendment, the Equal Rights Amendment, which actually introduced 3 years after the women's right to vote. I mean, they start working on it the next day, and it took them 3 years to agree on the language. When you look at the language between the 19th and the 28th side by side, you can see the end of it is the same: shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state on account of sex. The 19th Amendment is only about women's right to vote, because without voting, we couldn't get anything. So that was the first thing that was worked on. And then as soon as that was over, it's equality under the law for everything else. And so if you could move on to the next slide there, Emily. So the 19th Amendment, as I said, it was the first amendment that actually had sex in the Constitution. Voting is the only constitutional protected right that women have. I will repeat that. Voting is the only constitutionally protective right that we now have. And on the 28th, what I'd say about equal rights, this is a quote that Justice Scalia had said. It says, certainly the Constitution does not require discrimination based on sex, but it's the only issue is whether it prohibits it, and it does not. And that's why we need the 28th Amendment. Can you move to the next one? And so our speakers today are actually going to educate us. I'm sure we're going to learn, even if we know a lot, we're going to learn more. And so our first speaker is going to be Tina Cassidy. She's an author, a former journalist, and the chief marketing officer for GBH, which is a leading multi-platform creator of public media in America. As a journalist for the Boston Globe, she covered business, fashion, and politics. And as the author, she writes about women and culture. Her book, Mr. President, How Long Must We Wait? Alice Paul, Woodrow Wilson, and the Fight for the Right to Vote, was published in 2019. This is an amazing book. We've got a link for you so you can find the book if you want to get a copy of the book. It's an amazing book on a lot of levels, not only the history of it, but also the history of the people involved, Alice Paul and Woodrow Wilson. And Tina is going to focus on the 19th Amendment to the Constitution that gave women the right to vote. And then when we're going to move on to the 28th, and Wendy Murphy, who is the co-director of the Women's and Children's Advocacy Project under the Center for Law and Social Responsibility at New England's Law, where she also has been teaching for over 20 years, I believe. Wendy's been a pioneer in Title IX work and addressing violence towards women in college. She has dedicated her career to representing crime victims in civil and criminal cases, and working as an impact litigator, filing test cases to change the law and improve civil rights and constitutional rights for women and children. She recently wrote a law review article that was published by the Ohio Northern University titled Unequal Protection of the Laws for Women is Constitutional Terrorism. So how come nobody knows about it? Well, you're going to know about it today. And we also will give you a link to that law review article at the conclusion of this session for those of you who would like to read it. It's fascinating. And Wendy's going to actually focus from the introduction of the ERA all the way through the 90s. And then Kamala Lopez, who is a film director and the founder and president of Equal Means Equal. a national nonprofit organization dedicated to the immediate publication, adoption, and enforcement of the Equal Rights Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Her film by the same name was released in 2016 and used by activists across the country to reinvigorate the fight to complete ERA ratification and get the last 3 states, which happened in 2017, 2018, and 2020. The film won Best U.S. Documentary Audience Award at the Michael Moore's Film Festival. It's still playing on Prime. If you have a subscription, I encourage you to have a watch party at your home. And Kamala is going to focus on the last state 3 strategies to the present. So to my audience, as you listen to women's journey to equality from these 3 great women, if a question pops into your head, please put it in the chat, because we're going to use those when we get to the Q&A session. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Tina to start us out with and the Women's Road to Equality on women's getting the right to vote.
Thank you so much. It's delightful to be here to talk about my one of my favorite days of the year, Women's Equality Day. Thank you again. I'm delighted to be here. I'm going to walk you through about a 15-minute PowerPoint to give you the history of the 19th Amendment. And this book that I wrote came to be because in the summer of 2016, at the height of the presidential election campaign, I woke up one morning doom scrolling on Twitter and came across a hashtag for Women's Equality Day. And I didn't know what Women's Equality Day was all about. I had a few theories, but I clicked through and it led me down this intense rabbit hole of really trying to understand how women won the right to vote. I had been a journalist for many years, starting from when I was 15 years old. I had covered presidential campaigns as a political journalist, and yet I really had no idea what actually happened in the campaign for the 19th Amendment. And I knew very little about Alice Paul, despite having gone to an all-girls school. So this is why I wrote the book. I was incredibly fascinated by her and the story. And, you know, every good hero has a good villain that provides a foil for the story. And for me, that was Woodrow Wilson, who was the man who stood between women and the right to vote. So let's just ground ourselves in who Alice Paul was. She was a Quaker from New Jersey, and one of her religion's tenets involves equality. And her family believed that she should be educated just like her brothers, and she certainly was. They also believed that women should be allowed to play sports. And at a very early age, Alice Paul attended suffrage events with her mother in the New Jersey area. And so as you'll see, as her life evolved, it became very natural for her to assume that women should have the right to vote as well as other rights that men had as well. So you'll see in the lineup of academic credentials that she has here, there was this one little gap where between getting a master's degree at Columbia and a PhD at UPenn, she went to London. And there she was studying social justice, and as well as taking some classes at the London School of Economics. And she came across a speech that was given by Emmeline Pankhurst. This was in a college auditorium, and Emmeline was the leader of the suffrage movement in the UK. It was a family of women. They were all advocates for women's voting rights. And the fact that Emmeline was on stage speaking out about the rights that she believed women should have, while the audience filled with men taking college classes, was unlike anything she had ever seen before. I mean, they were blowing kazoos and they were, you know, throwing eggs and being incredibly rude. And Alice Paul couldn't believe what she was seeing. This was the opposite of the, you know, Quaker meetings that she was used to growing up, where it was polite and quiet and thoughtful. So she decided to join the Pankhursts in the fight in the UK. And what she learned being in the battle with them was many of their protest tactics, including, picketing and being arrested and being loud and standing on their literal soapboxes on the corner to share pamphlets about women's voting rights. Alice Paul, in one of these events, gets arrested and put in jail, and also is force-fed. And so it was a traumatic experience. She learned a lot. Meanwhile, her mother's writing her saying, "When are you coming home? This has gone on long enough." And so she comes home back to America full of ideas about Women's Equality Day. I wanted to share this map because I think it's really interesting. This is what voting rights look like for women when Alice Paul came back to America. And you'll see the Black states here are states that had no suffrage for women. There were only 6 states that allowed women to vote, and those are the white states, mostly in the West. And those states granted women voting rights in part because they weren't as populous as the others, and they really needed the volume of voters or people power in order to have weight in Congress. And then you can see some other states that are shaded gray, and those are states that may have given women partial voting rights. For example, they may have been allowed to vote in school committee elections at the local level, but nothing more than that. This is really about, one of these fundamental issues or questions that we have in America around states' rights versus federal rights. When Alice Paul looked at this map, she thought, there are a lot of states here that will never grant women the right to vote. And she didn't think that that was right. She thought all women in America deserved that opportunity. And so what she did next was she joined the existing movement, suffrage movement, led by people, like Susan B. Anthony and Carrie Chapman Catt, who believed that this state-by-state approach was the way to go, getting each state to amend their own constitution for voting rights. Alice Paul thought that that was not moving fast enough. And so she joined the group and then said that she wanted to try something new. And she advocated for a march. She called it a suffrage procession because, of course, march sounds a little aggressive. And so they weren't too sure that this was going to be a good idea. They were very worried about it, but they agreed to let her go ahead and organize it. She was quite persuasive, as you'll see. And so she planned to do this the day before Woodrow Wilson's inauguration in March of 1913. I think I just wanted to take a moment to highlight some of the aspects of this march because it was the first protest march in American history in Washington, D.C. And there were so many elements of this that really spoke to her creativity and also exposed some of the issues that were evident in the suffrage movement at that time. On the left, you have Inez Milholland. Alice Paul put this lawyer on a white horse. She was young and beautiful, and she thought that people would see Inez and think that she was the antithesis of the stereotype of women who may have been advocating for voting rights. On the right, you have Ida B. Wells, who was also an educated journalist, an anti-lynching crusader, and a brilliant woman from the Chicago area. And Alice Paul invited Ida B. Wells and other Black women to participate in the march, even though Washington was a segregated city and America was still very much a racially divided place. There was a lot of pageantry around how she organized the march. There were sections depicting women in different professions, including, nursing and teaching and so forth. There were college sororities. When Ida B. Wells and the women she was marching with, other Black women she was marching with, arrived, some of the suffrage organizers told them to get to the back of the line and march in a segregated way. They were worried about a race riot in Washington. And part of that was because Woodrow Wilson was the first president elected from the South. He was from Virginia and had been, he was born in Virginia and grew up in Georgia, but since the Confederacy. And so there was an expectation that there were going to be many men coming up from the southern states who would absolutely object to an integrated march. Well, what ended up happening is Ida B. Wells at the last minute jumps into the procession in her rightful place in an integrated way, but the men objected not just to the fact that the march was integrated, but the fact that women were marching, period. They had never seen anything like this. It devolved very quickly into melee, and people were hurt and ambulances were called, and the procession was not able to continue as long as it wanted to be. But Alice Paul broke onto the scene, stole the headlines the next day from Woodrow Wilson, and she was off to the races. So over the course of the coming years, she employed many different tactics, nonviolent protests to keep suffrage at the top of the public's consciousness. One of the first things that she did right after Wilson was inaugurated was to go and knock on the door at the White House. You could actually do that then, and asked for a meeting and pled the case about why women deserved the right to vote. And he gave Alice Paul and the other women she was there with a proverbial pat in the head and said, "Thanks for that, and I'll be in touch." And of course he wasn't. So she kept going back to the White House, but she also kept up this very visible public campaign, whether it was flying a suffrage flag from a biplane across some of the Western states. As you see on the left, that is Lucy Burns, her number 2 in the plane. And at another moment in time, she organized a bunch of women to drive a car with a banner cross country from San Francisco to Washington that had a scroll of signatures advocating for the passage of the 19th Amendment, and they would call in dispatches along the way. Alice Paul also founded a newspaper called The Suffragist and sold it for a few cents so that Women America could both contribute to the campaign and be informed about what was going on. So, this is one of the lessons that I take away from this, is just the endless creativity to stay top of mind. Her understanding of public relations is incredible for that time period, and when people really paid attention, and she knew that you have to work grassroots and grass tops, that asking Woodrow Wilson's permission for the right to vote would never be enough. She needed to change the hearts and minds of Americans from coast to coast. And so that's what she did. However, as the clock was ticking, she realized that no progress was being made on the legislative front. And so they decided she and a group of women known as the Silent Sentinels began picketing outside the White House in 1917. And Woodrow Wilson did not like this one bit. This is right around the time that America was involved in the First World War. And Woodrow Wilson, was portraying himself as the savior of democracy in the world. And women stood there in shifts in the freezing cold and in the heat. And Woodrow Wilson had them arrested and thrown in jail. And some of them had 6-month sentences. And it's there. That's when these women also were force-fed. You can see how Alice Paul brought the tactics that she had learned from the Pankhurst in the UK. On the right, you've got Lucy Burns, once again, her number 2. Alice Paul was also thrown in this jail in Virginia. And on the left, you have an artist's depiction of the force feedings, but it was really horrific. And the women refused to be released from jail, even when some officials were able to spring them, because they knew that the bad PR was actually helping the cause, even though it may have been physically and mentally hurting them as individuals. In fact, Alice Paul refused to give in. And so instead of just releasing her, they put her in a mental hospital. You can see in the picture on the left, the top right corner, there's a little boarded up window there. They had to board up her window where she was staying because women, as you see on the right, had gathered to sing songs and shout her encouragement, but they were also protesting as well. And the doctor said that they were committing her because they couldn't understand why she was so obsessed with Woodrow Wilson. Let's talk about Woodrow Wilson for a moment. He did position himself as the keeper of democracy around the world. Once American troops were committed to fight in the Great War, he and his administration clamped down on many First Amendment rights and said that people weren't allowed to protest. He confiscated books and shut down periodicals that were critical of him and his administration. But the women used the First World War as another point of leverage. For example, on one day, some envoys from Russia were coming to the White House, and so the Silent Sentinels set up shop with these what was then provocative banners, basically saying that, we can't be the beacon of democracy when half of our population is unable to vote. The public went absolutely crazy over this. They could not believe how these women could do something that they thought was so unpatriotic as to protest in front of a foreign emissary. And it really just stirred even more debate. But as more mothers lost their sons abroad or had to run the family farm themselves because their husbands were off at war, they began to see the point that, that women were half of this country. They were responsible for putting food on the table and raising families and often working, filling those jobs that the men could not while they were away, and they also deserved the right to vote. So, of course, we all now know that the 19th Amendment did pass in 1920, but it was only because Woodrow Wilson knew that the public had changed its point of view, and he was concerned about the Democratic Party losing control of the White House in the next election. He had served his full two terms, so he was a lame duck. And so he allowed for the 19th Amendment to go forward through Congress and went through the state ratification process, with Tennessee casting the last vote. So, as was said already, the day after, Alice Paul celebrated the 19th Amendment passage by raising a glass of grape juice, because she was also a temperance advocate. She got to work writing the Equal Rights Amendment with Crystal Eastman. And, she was very active throughout the coming decades of her life, working on the National Women's Party, which had its headquarters in Washington, D.C. From her bedroom window there, she could literally see Capitol Hill, and worked on all kinds of legislation, more than 300 bills, and even after the Second World War, worked to help with women's rights all over the world. However, the Equal Rights Amendment really did not make any progress up until the 1970s. And I know that the next speakers will talk more about, what transpired in the 70s and all the way through till today. But thanks to the second wave of feminists, people like Gloria Steinem and others, 35 states did ratify the Equal Rights Amendment. It began to stall. And then something really interesting happened, which was, concern after the 26th Amendment, after the 2016 election, that women would be losing rights, specifically around abortion care, and other rights. And so there was a renewed movement to put forward the Equal Rights Amendment. And what's really interesting is that here you see Jennifer Carroll Foy, who's a state senator in Virginia, holding her yellow rose, leading the charge for Virginia to become the 38th state to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment in 2020. But before that, in 2017, Illinois ratified. In 2018, Nevada ratified. And in 2019, Arizona tried and failed to ratify. But no matter, Virginia got the ERA over the line as the 38th state. And I like to show this map because it evokes the earlier map that I showed from 1913, where you have sort of a big chunk of states, in this case, white states. These are the same states that, did not want women to vote as well in many cases. And so you can see the logic to the need for a federal constitutional amendment, because there are some states that seem immovable as it relates to rights for women and for sex equality overall. And with that, I will turn it over to Wendy.
Thank you, Tina. I appreciate that. So Wendy, you're going to pick it up and take us, starting with the ERA, you'll cross over some and really get into some of the meat of it. So appreciate it. Turn it over to you. You're going to run your own slides.
Thank you so much. That was a good tee up, Tina. Thank you for doing that. I just want to say a few things that are reactive so I don't forget them, because I think they're really important. First is, I think it was Kathy who started off by saying the only constitutional right women have today is the right to vote. That's partly correct. Yes, it's textually in the Constitution. The right to vote is codified as our 19th Amendment. The problem is the 19th Amendment is modified by the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment is where persons got equal protection of the laws, but women were not persons, and we're still not fully equal persons, which is why we need the ERA. So even the right to vote for women, although it's in there and it's textual in the 19th Amendment, it is offset by the fact that when courts have to enforce any rights, any laws on behalf of women, including the 19th Amendment, including the 13th Amendment, which prohibits slavery, they are allowed, government officials, including judges and the courts, are allowed to enforce all rights, including textual constitutional rights, differently and worse when they're applied to women. That's one of the reasons sex trafficking of women is such a serious problem globally, but especially in this country these days. Laws against slavery in general may be enforced differently and worse on behalf of women, so women are disproportionately vulnerable to that kind of crime. This is one of the reasons the ERA is so important. So I just mentioned that. It's not that women aren't being allowed to vote, it's that we have to understand that this precious right is subject to unequal treatment without the ERA. So who knows what that could mean for the future. We all saw what happened with Roe versus Wade. This right itself is vulnerable without equality in the Constitution. The other thing I want to say very quickly about Alice Paul is the most important thing she did was establish the National Women's Party, number one, establishing it, and number two, making it fiercely nonpartisan. She was really the only women's rights activist who was fiercely nonpartisan. I mean, we all can see from Tina's talk, she was brilliant. She was highly educated, strategically, politically speaking, she was a genius. But she was fiercely nonpartisan, which is where she got her power from. And a lot of historians and scholars will say, and I agree with this, and it's in my law review article, my new one, this is why we won suffrage when we did in 1920. It was because Alice used the power of a nonpartisan, united class of people, women, and said to both sides, she didn't care who was in power. She said to whoever was in power, and in this case, of course, the focus was on Wilson, a Democrat, but she didn't care if you were a Democrat, a Republican, or something other. If you don't do what we tell you to do, we will not vote for you. And at that time, some women did have voting rights, so it did matter. It was generally stuck in the West, but there were even places where women did have local voting rights at that time. So she was smart to leverage voting rights in the way that she did against both parties. Some politicians would come to her and say, no, let me tell you what we're going to do for women. We're going to protect women's reproductive rights, or we're going to protect this and that. And Alice would say, I don't care what you tell me you're going to do for me. I'm going to tell you what I want. And the Women's Party will tell you what you will do for us. So we don't care what else you think women should care about. We will tell you what we care about. We care about suffrage. And she was a one-trick pony on suffrage. And was very clear that once that got done, she would move on to equality and, quote unquote, the fix of the 14th Amendment, which is what the ERA does. So she was very focused, but she was also very strategic. And I just want to emphasize, because it probably matters today as much as ever, that women appreciate the power they gain from being nonpartisan because of the power that gives us in the form of leverage against both sides. What we need to be fighting against is corruption and the power that both sides have to maintain women's subjugation, because it's extremely financially lucrative for both sides. I mean, this is, I think, stating the obvious, but an enormous amount of money is made off of women because they are unequal, from unequal pay to, again, sex trafficking and pornography. These things, if women had equality, would not be as legally possible and permissible as they are today. So it's always about money. I hope that doesn't sound like I'm stating the obvious, because in this country, most things are about money. And we have to think about why we're not making progress on the ERA from that perspective. And because both parties are funded by enormous amounts of corporate money, being independent, being fiercely nonpartisan is the only way we're going to make progress. I just wanted to say that as well. Okay, and by the way, it's also why going state by state for suffrage was a dumb idea. And it remains a dumb idea today to focus on the ERA state by state. There are some organizations that say we should try to fight for equality in a state by state sense. We'll get a state constitutional right to equality, you know, a state ERA here, a state ERA there, and that way we will create national equality for women, because every state will have equality for women. No, I mean, there's a very dumb way to go about it, and it's a naive way to go about it, because as I said about the 19th Amendment and the 13th Amendment and all other laws, if we in fact establish equality under the state constitutions of every jurisdiction, every state in this country, those state constitutions are then subject to unequal enforcement in the courts, because they're not rooted in a national guarantee of equal treatment. This is why the ERA at a national level is the most important thing we can do first. In a sense, any laws we pass are being passed on a broken plate. They're going to fall through the cracks of inequality. You have to fix the plate first, so that whatever laws you do pass are subject to equal treatment, equal enforcement by all government officials in all branches, legislative, executive, and judicial, federal and state. If you don't fix the plate first, all laws are subject to unequal enforcement and therefore help to perpetuate, not fix, the problem of women's inequality. All right, so I'm sorry, could we just go back up a little bit? I want to see where I want to, okay, yes, you can keep going, keep going. I think everybody understands that there were many versions of the ERA. The earliest one that never was filed, which was kind of cumbersome. The second one that Alice Paul wrote in 1923 with Crystal Eastman actually was, I think, a smarter version, because it says men and women shall have equal rights throughout the United States and every place subject to its jurisdiction. This was important because it was making the statement about women. And it was doing this because it was women who were excluded from the 14th Amendment when it was adopted in 1868. It granted equal protection of the laws to persons, but it was decided very quickly by the Supreme Court that women weren't persons. So as the excluded class of people, women, Alice Paul knew that she had to write an amendment to stick women back in. The problem with the 1943 version, which is the current version, is that it used the word sex instead of women, which kind of clouds the idea that the constitutional defect was the absence of women, and makes it sound like the absence of women wasn't the issue. It was a problem of men and women equally, which is, so we need to use the word sex, which captures males and females equally, among other categories, by the way, today. And I think that's problematic because, politically speaking, it erased the concept of women being the ones who suffered from that intentional exclusion in the 14th Amendment under the most precious right we have, which is equal protection of all laws and equal treatment by all government officials in all branches. Nevertheless, we have what we have now, which is the language of sex. And again, as Tina said, it was changed to mirror and reflect what had been successful language for the 19th Amendment. So there was a logic to it, but I personally think that it's problematic. Next slide. This is the timeline. I won't go into it in detail, except to just emphasize that it's so obvious where women have been and not been in our history. You know, when the Constitution was first created, and even all the way through the civil rights, I'm sorry, the Civil War and the Reconstruction Amendments, women knew they were not getting fair treatment. They knew they were not being protected. They knew they were being excluded from the Constitution, and they fought like hell, but they had no real voice. So the struggle that women faced was, how do you fight for rights when you have no status? You're not even a person. And this was really the horror of the 14th Amendment in 1868. The fact that it explicitly said, persons shall have equal protection of the laws, and women sort of celebrated, right? Well, we're persons, so we must have equal protection rights. In order to make sure they were correct, they immediately went to the courts and filed a couple of lawsuits. You can, next slide, please. When women went to the courts after the 14th Amendment was adopted, they said, we're persons, so we're going to sue now. And the two key cases that most people who know this area of law understand are critical to understanding the exclusion of women. And again, so if you ask anybody today who doesn't know much about the ERA, if they understand women's inequality, they'll say, hey, I read the 14th Amendment. It says persons have equal protection. Women are persons. What's your beef? What's your problem? And it takes a lot of effort to say, well, let me explain. The word persons, you might think, does capture women, but the Supreme Court never accepted that women were persons, and they did it in this kind of obtuse, backward way in both Bradwell and minor cases, which came very swiftly after the 14th Amendment, in my opinion, for the purpose of making explicitly clear that women were not persons. They did not have equal protection of the laws. In my opinion, also, they did not even have due process rights, because only persons could have due process rights. But the court didn't do it by saying, we hereby rule that women are not persons. What they said was, in these cases brought by women who were asking to be treated equally, they either ignored the Equal Protection Clause or changed the conversation in the court to one where it was implied that women were not persons. Now, what's interesting in Myra Bradwell's case in 1873, she didn't even assert an Equal Protection Clause argument, which is very strange. I would call that legal malpractice on her part against herself. But in the Happersett case, there was an equal protection claim, and the court just ignored it. Next slide, please. So by ignoring it, the court was declaring to women in this country, you're not persons. Forget equality, you're not even a person. And they repeated that absence of women in these cases that followed, including these late 1800s cases, which did give personhood and equal protection of the laws to every other category of person. Next slide. So I'm not even going to go into this too much, except to say that we all know what happened. Alice Paul and many women were furious that women were excluded from the 14th Amendment in two very important ways. One, denied the right to vote. The other denied personhood and equal protection and due process rights. So Alice Paul, especially led by women who had a similar mindset to hers, she forms the National Women's Party, says we're going to focus on the vote and then the ERA. And that's exactly what she did. Well, as you heard earlier, the ERA got filed with Congress, but did not make much progress because neither party supported women's equality, just like neither party supported the right to vote until the civil rights era. And then women started to have enough steam where they were making noise enough in Washington and demanding that the ERA be passed by Congress. Unfortunately, and both parties are guilty of this, it was originally filed without a deadline. It had no deadline attached. It could have, it took us a long time to pass the 19th Amendment, and that had no deadline either. We knew this was going to take much longer. But the compromise, which was designed to kill the ERA, was to add a 7-year deadline at the last minute. Once the deadline was tacked on, the ERA went flying through Congress, but both sides knew it was going to be easy to kill the ERA. All they had to do was, prevent a few states from ratifying, which politically speaking at that time was going to be easy. So everyone knew that the 7-year deadline was going to kill the ERA, and it sort of did. It did, it was supposed to be ratified by 1982 because they extended the 7-year deadline to 10. But we only got to 35 instead of 38 states, which was the 3/4 we needed. And everybody assumed the ERA was dead when we didn't get to 38 by the deadline until 1992, when the 27th Amendment was ratified by the last necessary state. And the country embraced it. And women were furious. Women were absolutely furious. How could the 27th Amendment be accepted when it got 203 years to ratify and women got 7, arguably 10? How is that possible? It cannot be constitutionally tolerated that one amendment gets 2 centuries to ratify and women only get a handful of years. So women adopted what's called the 3-state strategy. We're not going to start over with a brand new ERA. We're going to go back and get 3 more states to ratify, and then we'll go to court and fight about the deadline. But we're going to fight for those 3 states, and we're going to argue that the Constitution is illegitimate if it allows some amendments to have 203 years to ratify and others only 7 or 10. And that's exactly what we did. And in 2012, we got all the fuel that we needed to keep fighting, because the United States archivist, whose job it is to put new amendments in the Constitution once they're ratified, said in writing, I will put the ERA in the Constitution if 3 more states ratify, regardless of the deadline. This was a promise in writing, and so everybody started fighting. And again, led by Equal Means Equal and Camila Lopez's film and activism, we went to Nevada and won another state in 2017. Then we went to Illinois and won in 2018. And then we finally went to the last state in Virginia. In January of 2020, Virginia ratified, and we were so happy, except that the archivist reneged on his promise and said, no, I'm not putting it in the Constitution, because the Department of Justice under President Trump, the Office of Legal Counsel in particular, wrote a memorandum opinion saying, I don't think the ERA should be put into the Constitution because the deadline has expired. Next slide, please. So I was the first lawyer in the country to file a lawsuit against the archivist. I had been planning to do this anyway. We had been talking for years around the country about how this was our strategy. If necessary, we would go into court and fight and sue the government if they didn't do the right thing. And that's exactly what I did. I filed a lawsuit against the archivist in Massachusetts federal court. Another lawsuit was filed after mine in DC federal court by the last 3 states to ratify. Both of our lawsuits were dismissed on procedural grounds. Just so you know, I had an Obama nominee, Black female liberal judge. She absolutely ruled against us and slammed us. A similar Obama nominee in the DC case slammed them and dismissed these cases, which taught us, hey, wait a minute, this really isn't a left-right issue. And of course, lots of people, because Trump was in office in 2020, lots of women voted for Biden and Harris because they said they support women's equality. And our lawsuits were pending when the presidential campaign was underway in 2020. As soon as Biden got in, we all stood there waiting. They're going to stop fighting against our 2 lawsuits. They're going to unblock the ERA, and Biden's going to tell the archivist to publish. That did not happen. Biden blocked the ERA exactly the same way Trump did. Biden kept fighting against me in my lawsuit using the same arguments Trump's DOJ had made. And Biden kept fighting against the lawsuit in DC as well, making exactly the same arguments against women's equality that Trump's DOJ had made. Next slide, please. So here's the problem. We are now stuck. Women learned, which is the good thing, that we're stuck because we now know neither party supports women's equality. So what do? My opinion, we hearken back to what Alice Paul taught us. Next slide, please. The most important thing we can do, and do it in Alice Paul's name. You can keep going because I'm running out of time. I just want people to understand the most important thing we can do is remember what Alice Paul taught us, which is we must unite. We must unite as women. We must fight for women, and we must be fiercely nonpartisan because we have to hold both sides accountable, or we'll continue to get batted back and forth and remain in political invisibility and meaninglessness. I mean, it really is the case that women are politically irrelevant and meaningless so long as we don't unite in a nonpartisan fashion to get our equality established in the national constitution. So the one thing I want to leave you with today is not only the message of please let's unite and be nonpartisan, because it's vital that we hold both sides accountable, but let's appreciate where we are this moment in time right now. We only have the power of our vote once every 4 years of this magnitude. There's going to be an election in November. Joe Biden has the power right now to pick up the phone and tell the archivist to put the ERA in the Constitution, because it's been ratified. The Constitution is clear. Once you reach 38 states, it should be published in the, it must be published in the Constitution forthwith. That's what the law says. It's currently being blocked. Biden can unblock it. He can pick up the phone and tell the archivist to do her damn job and put the ERA in the Constitution. And we have the power of our vote right now, especially in the swing states, to threaten not to vote for Kamala Harris unless Biden puts the ERA in the Constitution before Election Day. We only have this power once every 4 years. Alice knew what to do with Wilson. We know what to do with Biden. Harris loses if Biden doesn't put the ERA in the Constitution. We have the power to do that. We'll never have the money to beat back the money that is keeping us unequal, but we do have the votes, 170 million strong. We have the votes. We have to use it now or never. Now is the time.
Awesome. Wendy's such a rock star. Well, thank you so much for teeing this up. I'd like to share my screen and tell you a little bit from our perspective of what we've been doing, and hopefully really activate all of the people on this call to join us, and let's make this happen. I think we have 80 days or 70 days or whatever it is. We gotta put our shoulder to the wheel and push this over. It's a 3-minute phone call that we need. So my journey began with the Equal Rights Amendment in 2008 when I found out that women were not equal. I was told that by Alice Paul's ghost at the Smithsonian, and really blew my mind, because I thought, hey, we can be, do, and have whatever we want. That's what we were told, We were gaslit by this government to believe that we were already equal. That's the main problem right now, is that 96% of Americans believe men and women are equal. And I think it is over 81% of us believe that equality is already in the Constitution. So I started the ERA Education Project to sort of tell people that weren't part of the movement in the 60s and 70s that, this was not the case. I launched something called ERA University, which was a peer-to-peer educational project. So I would teach older students and they would write curriculum for younger students. And then I realized that really we needed a tool. And since I come from a film background, I'm an actor and a filmmaker, and I had recently done something called Speechless Without Writers for the Writers Guild of America, where we used famous actors to explain that without a script, there can be no movies. I thought, well, this is going to be very easy. We're going to make little films and everyone will go, oh my God, this is ridiculous. But, here we sit brokenhearted so many years later. But anyway, I spent the next 8 years making the documentary film Equal Means Equal, which I highly recommend that you show to other people, because it looks at every aspect of our society. Well, actually boiled down to about 10 or 12 of them, from pregnancy discrimination to rape to equal pay to bodily autonomy, etc., trafficking, and looks at it through the lens of how would legal and constitutional equality have an effect on these areas. and proves out that the lack of ERA is the web that keeps women in this position where they are. And once you ratify ERA, publish ERA, adopt ERA, the web begins to disintegrate with the help of litigation. Thanks to so we started doing house parties all over the country because we couldn't get mainstream distribution, which is no shock because people don't care about women, certainly in Hollywood, except if they're nude. But we worked with a wonderful Nevada state senator by the name of Patricia Spearman, and she was extremely active in advocating for ERA in the Nevada state legislature. And they had, I believe it was a majority of women in that state at that time, and she was able to push it through. And that gave everybody in the movement hope that yes, this could be done. And that's when we started. I know Tina mentioned the Silent Sentinel Challenge of 1917. We redid the Silent Sentinel Challenge in 2017, 100 years later, and we had women standing out day and night, all day, every day, just like Alice Paul, for many, many months. And we were very effective and excited a lot of women to pick this fight back up again. And then we actually redid the suffrage march that Tina mentioned, and we called it White Horse Red Ladies. And our Vice President, Natalie White, who's an amazing horsewoman, we rode a horse down the street and got it. This was, okay, so now forget it. You would be shot before you got there. But at the time, we managed to convince the people at the Hilton Hotel that there was a law that said that you could ride a horse because it was this ancient law. I mean, we were really making stuff up and it worked. And we did this protest in front of the White House called White Horse Red Ladies, did a bunch of videos on that. And we launched something called the Equality Pledge. And this was when we were on Lawrence O'Donnell's show, and we talked about how there were these states that we needed to go after. And we started to target all the unratified states. And these are they. And what we did was we sent a copy of the movie to every single congressperson or senator in all of these states, so hundreds and hundreds of movies, and lobbied all of them to watch the movie and really understand what the ERA was. We also managed to get the ERA in the conversation at Women's March 2018, because unfortunately at Women's March 2017, we were denied access. There was a real push against bringing the ERA back up, even from Ellie Smeal and the Feminist Majority, from all of the people that seem like, wow, you should want the ERA. We were told in no uncertain terms by Eleanor Smeal that we will not accept you doing the three-state strategy. We want to start over. Carolyn Maloney has a new ERA. And we're going to start it over. And, we said, no, we're not. That's disrespectful to all the millions of women who have spent 100 years on this thing. And there's no reason to start it over. It's very clear what the Constitution says. The deadline was placed in the preamble of the amendment, not in the text. It was not voted on by the states, and therefore it imbalanced power between the federal government and the states, which violates Article 5 of the Constitution. So the deadline is a crock of shit, and we're not going to accept it, and we're going to go get these three states. The Women's March was, again, there's so much money in this movement. There's so much corruption in the women's movement, unfortunately, that you find yourself often at loggerheads with those very people that are supposed to be your staunchest allies. But unfortunately, you know, money is a very powerful force, especially in our society. And so the Women's March said unequivocally to multiple ones of us, we will not address the ERA in 2017. So Natalie, myself, and some of our team just showed up and put a big speaker, and we're yelling about the ERA to the side of them. But anyway, by 2018, and the fact that Nevada had ratified, we were getting a little more steam. We decided to focus on Arizona, which, you know, in retrospect was not the greatest idea, but we put a lot of energy. We did a whole rock concert tour across the state. We went to all the colleges. One thing we did do, for better or worse, is we got Sinema elected because there were so many college kids that voted because of the Equal Rights Amendment that they needed to open all these new polling places on all the campuses. But we did not succeed in Arizona at that time. We moved to Illinois because Illinois had in the original fight, or not original, in the fight in the 60s and 70s, Illinois was just one vote away. So we went back to Illinois. We had a very good relationship with Lou Lang, the deputy majority leader in the state. And we did huge rallies where we brought in busloads of women from all over Illinois, rural areas, etc. We also partnered with, we're a lot more intersectional in our approach. We partnered with a lot of the Black organizations like Rainbow Push and SEIU and the Deltas, and just really reached out to Black women because they felt very left out of the first time, and they were very important. So we did succeed in Illinois. It was not assured, but we did succeed. We testified in their hearings. As I mentioned, we did several rallies, and now we were at 2 states down, 1 to go. This was 2018. And then someone, probably me, had the horrible idea to go to Missouri. That was frightening. They basically ran us out on a rail. I didn't know if we were going to make it out alive. No offense to anyone from Missouri, but that state legislature was terrifying. They started yelling at Natalie because she mentioned the Bible. She was trying to, I don't know. It was horrible. And they had no intention of letting women out of the kitchen or the dungeon or wherever they have them over there. So we ran away from Missouri and tried Louisiana. You know, that we seemed to get pretty far. The Senate passed it out of committee, but we didn't succeed in Louisiana. In the meantime, we had been going to Virginia every single year because we thought we could win in Virginia, but there was such an entrenched, like, misogyny mafia that was in charge of their Senate and their House, and they were there like barnacles. I mean, there were guys there for 29 years. They weren't going anywhere. They were they were like throwing white power signs on the floor. We started doing die-ins and huge protests. There's Natalie and Rachel being dragged out. We did a fake marriage. We were showing that they were taking bribes. It was so corrupt in Virginia, frankly. But we kept going back and back. And in the meantime, Wendy had helped us file an amicus brief. I didn't mention the first lawsuit we filed against Betsy DeVos, who was trying to gut Title IX. But Wendy helped us file a amicus brief in Bostock because we thought, if sex covers gender, then there's a whole other group of allies that we can bring into this fight, the LGBTQ community. And it turned out, yes, we had got a victory on that because what it proved is that no matter how you present, no matter what gender you are covered by the Equal Rights Amendment, period. I don't care how many chromosomes you have. If you're a human being with chromosomes, you're covered by ERA. And that I thought would be a big advantage. Cut to now, I don't see any sort of solidarity from LGBTQ. I don't think that they really are grasping, but we'll get to, that's why we're really focused in West Hollywood actually today and moving forward on explaining to the gay community how the ERA is for them as well. Then there were, there were starting to be hints that the overall government was taking notice of this because they decided to have congressional hearings on the ERA after 36 years in 2019. Our position is and has always been that the role of Congress is done, okay? They passed Congress, the National Congress passed the ERA in 1972. The role of Congress is over. However, it benefits politicians to pretend that it isn't and to keep doing these weird bills that basically say the sky is blue, the sun is out, the ERA, it's just complete garbage. But it does two things. One is it allows them to virtue signal. Two, it allows them to get votes. And three, the one positive thing it does is it brings it more into the public consciousness that there is a conversation about the ERA. So that's why I mentioned these hearings. So Virginia, we finally moved to Virginia, rented a house in Peanut Country, Suffolk County, which, as I mentioned, had been so racist, so awful. And the key to Virginia was the fact that the gerrymandered maps had been declared illegal by the Supreme Court that year. So finally, the votes of Black people were actually going to count. So we just went up and down with our partners at VA Ratify ERA. We went up and down in a purple van, giving out free ice cream and explaining to people in barbershops and football games and, just Walmart parking lots, like everywhere we could, that look, not only does your vote actually count this year, but if Virginia votes properly, women win forever. Because at that point, that's what we thought. We win Virginia, we win, right? Famous last words. So we were in Virginia for many, many months and we succeeded. This is the first Black man ever to be elected in Suffolk County. Clint Jenkins, who was our partner in this, and we ratified Virginia. This should have been the end of the slideshow, but unfortunately, the government blocked us in 2020, and Wendy filed our lawsuit to compel the archivist to publish the ERA.
Okay.
So the states of Nevada, Illinois, and Virginia also filed suit. Our lawsuit gained a lot of support. The Teamsters, SAG-AFTRA, Conference of Mayors, we had over 82 amici. In our case, the brief was written by our wonderful attorney, Arlene Rocky. And then there were this is a gift to show all the incredible, companies that supported the Equal Rights Amendment. Now, 91 top American companies came together to support ratification of the ERA. Everyone from Etsy and Apple and Microsoft and Google and Pepsi and everybody under the sun came out because it was no skin off their butts to say that they supported it if it wasn't going to be adopted, right? Because they don't want to pay. And now, since then, our protests have resumed and now we're focused on publication. So we redid the Silent Sentinel project outside the Department of Justice and outside the churches, Biden's churches, Garland Synagogue. We continued our lawsuit. In the oral arguments, Biden's lawyers admitted that the role of Congress is done. So out of his front of his face, he's saying Congress has to act, and his lawyers are contradicting him in court. We lose our case on standing. The other case loses on standing. We get arrested. We go to the Senate hearings in DC, and many of the Equal Means Equal team is arrested and put in the same jail as Alice Paul, which we're very proud of. Roe falls. And now this week, the American Bar Association comes out saying, yes, the ERA is the law and must be adopted. American Constitution Society, yesterday, the League of Women Voters, Labor, and now we started a campaign called Final Impact. What Final Impact is a way to bring the public in by having everybody take a picture of themselves holding a phone to urge Biden to make that call for equality. And that's where we are right now. We want everybody to do that. Send us a picture holding the phone. We'll put it up on a wall. Like Wendy said, we're not here to support politicians or political cycles. We're here for women. Women need equality. We don't care how, let the chips fall where they may. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, not only for this presentation, but for really committing so much of your life to this, all of you. And it's going to take all of us keep going. We've learned a lot. I'm going to bring this up so that we can take action. I'm going to set this up, and as you're doing this, we may pose a couple of questions here. Let me just get this going. Okay. So this is for all of our folks here. Emily, you can look and see if there's some questions we can ask our panelists, but I wanted to make sure we have time for this to take action. So everybody on here, you're going to see in the chat, Emily's going to drop in, or Barb's going to drop in some of these links. There are 2 links for petitions. So there's a petition sponsored by Shattering Glass that you can sign, as well as a national student-led petition. And you can sign these right now while we're here. Also, Kamala sent me this morning, so this is kind of sponsored by Equal Means Equal, and you can speak to this. They put up a letter to Jill Biden, just as the mother of Vern asked her son to be a good boy and publish. Maybe Jill Biden can ask her husband to publish. So you can comment on the content. I read some of it this morning because it's an education letter as well as an ask letter. And then I'll just say too, as soon as you finish your petition, I'd like you to put these 3 telephone numbers in your phone. One is to President Biden and the other is to Vice President Harris. These are telephone numbers you can text to. And what we want you to do, text every day, publish the ERA now. You can change it. You can say publish the ERA on Women's Equality Day. You can say publish the ERA because, and just every day text them a message.
Kathy, can I inject one thing?
Yes.
Please, I beg you, if you text or sign anything, add, I will not vote for Kamala Harris unless Biden publishes before Election Day. It's our only leverage. All this pleading and hopefulness, we hope you do the right thing. That's what Alice said only naive, silly people do. We have to make the threat. Now, personally, I don't care if you actually vote for Kamala Harris. That's your business. But don't give that away. Don't give your vote away. Biden is blocking the ERA. Why would you vote for someone who is enslaving you in second-class citizenship? This is the moment in time now. Threaten no votes for Harris unless the ERA is published.
Kathy, we do have a question for the speakers.
Yes.
So the question is, how does the ABA resolution on ERA impact the movement? And this came from Jimmy Cochran Pratt. Thank you, Jimmy, for the question.
I can answer that very quickly. I've read it in detail, and it's I guess, I don't know if anyone else is interested, but the ABA resolution is wonderful in the sense that it declares, as we said in our lawsuit, that the ERA is now valid because the Article 5 requirements have been met. That is to say, Congress proposed an amendment, 3/4 of the states ratified it. That's all the Constitution requires. Put it in the damn Constitution. The problem with the ABA resolution is that it also says Congress should now act and do something, like pass a resolution invalidating the deadline or pass a resolution directing the archivist to publish. Congress has no authority to act. Right now, all constitutional scholars that I respect agree Congress cannot act. Right now, they only have one role to play in amending the Constitution, and that is proposing an amendment. There are other circumstances where a political decision has to be answered by Congress. This isn't one of them. So the problem with the ABA resolution is that it muddies the water a little bit. Well, if we publish, do we still also have to go to Congress? And then the activist energy gets muted and misdirected. We need publication now. Now, let me be honest. Publication won't guarantee success, but it does put the burden on the other side. It puts the presumption in favor of validity, and then the naysayers have to fight against us. Right now, we don't have that. Publication gives us that. We need to focus on publication and not focus on Congress. Congress has no power, and focusing on Congress wastes our resources, diverts our attention, and waters down the energy we need right now to stay focused on publication.
Thank you, Wendy. I'm watching time because I know we're kind of at the end. You will be emailed after this event. It may not happen till Monday or whatever, but these items are there as well as some others. So things to continue to educate yourself. As I said, the movie Equal Means Equal is still available on Prime. If you haven't seen it, have a house party, watch it by yourself. Kamala also mentioned The Final Impact. You'll have information on that so you can learn more, to take a picture, where to upload it if you'd like to be part of that campaign. And then also the ERA Coalition Elect Equality campaign also has a way for you. They're going out to people who are running and asking them if they're supportive of the Equal Rights Amendment, and through whatever criteria they're using, then they're actually posting that information on this website. You, as a voter, should ask anybody that you are wanting to vote for or thinking about, well, how do they stand on women's equality and publication of the Equal Rights Amendment? You'll be interested to hear how people respond. I've had some of my own educational opportunities with people running for office. So you'll be sent that, and then I'll just turn it over to Emily, who can kind of help close this out. And we'll stick around if people want to talk, but I also want to make sure we're kind of done and powered down. So Emily, could you close us out for the day?
Absolutely. Thank you all so much. I'm going to attempt to come back on camera. When we were discussing technical difficulties earlier, it's me. I'm the technical difficulty issue. I just wanted to say a massive, massive thank you to our amazing panelists. Let's give them a virtual or, round of applause. Really fantastic, comprehensive information here. And time is of the essence. It is time to publish the ERA. It is time to get this done. We've waited too long, damn it. And thank you to Kathy Talbin for really bringing this forward. Kathy, this would not have been possible without her. So thank you so much. Another virtual round of applause to you. As Kathy mentioned, we said we would wrap up by 1:30. We're a few minutes over. If it's okay with the panelists, we can stay on for a question if anyone has any. But otherwise, as mentioned, the recording of this presentation will be made available, as well as the links that were shown on the screen. We've been chatting with Kamala about having her a screening of her documentary, and then we'll also keep you abreast of Tina's new book. We have a link for Wendy's law review that's going to go out, so lots of information for you to dig your teeth into. And keep it up, you guys. We're right there. We're at the end. Time is of the essence. Let's keep the pressure on and make sure that women have full equality. So again, thank you all so much. And any last words before we close out today? Awesome. Well, on that note then, happy Women's Equality Day on Monday. And thank you so much for joining us. Take care.
Yeah.
Thank you.